Good morning. Today we are continuing with our factors, our fractions, and our denominators, common denominators, multiples, least common multiples, all of this fun stuff. So today our CO is CO19. I can identify and calculate equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are those fractions that are the same value, just different numbers. So in order to find those, we need to know what a fraction is. A fraction is a number of the form AB where B is not equal to 0. You can't have a denominator of 0. Fractions are used to describe equal parts of a whole. So 5/7 and 18/10. Those are examples of fractions. When we say that it is a part of a whole, if it is 5/7 of a whole, you think about it being broken up into 7 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 5/7 would be 5 sections of that whole. So how many colored in out of how many possible? So the fraction, the numerator, is how many you actually have. The denominator is the possible amount you could have. So 5/7 would be 5 parts of one whole. The numerator, A, in the fraction AB. The numerator of 7/13 would be 7. So the numerator is always the top number. The denominator, B, in the fraction AB, where B is not equal to 0. So if we have that denominator of 7/13, that would be the bottom. Numerator is the top, denominator is the bottom. Equivalent fraction, fractions that represent the same part to whole relationship. Equivalent fractions have the same simplest form. So if we see 6/8 and 9/12, they can both be simplified down to 3/4. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Reduce it down as much as you can go. 6/8, I can divide out a common factor of 2.
Luke Miller, please report
6
to the
divided
office.
by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. With 9/12, I can divide out the common factor of 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Same fraction that we can go down to. So they are equivalent fractions. They both mean 3/4. So an equivalent fraction means you can simplify it down to the same fraction. Simplest form. A fraction is in its simplest form if its numerator and denominator have a greatest common factor of 1. They are relatively prime. So the biggest factor that they share is the 1. You can't divide a number out equally out of both the numerator and the denominator. So let's look at our example. Identifying equivalent fractions. There are 10 fish in an aquarium, and 2 of them are goldfish. What fraction of the fish in the aquarium are goldfish? So the numerator is the number of parts that you have. The denominator is the number of the whole, how many altogether. So we have the number of goldfish. There were 2 goldfish. Out of how many fish altogether? There were 10 fish altogether. So always remember, the numerator is how many you actually have, how many parts you actually have. Denominator is how many possible, how many fish were there altogether. So what would be an equivalent fraction to that 2/10? So thinking about equivalent fractions, can anybody tell me what an equivalent fraction to 2/10 might be? Penelope,
1/5.
how did you get that?
I divided 2 and 10 by 2.
Yeah, Penelope went down. She simplified for an equivalent fraction. So she said, oh, they both share a factor of 2. I'm going to divide that 2 out. 2 divided by 2 equals 1. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. This is where it really comes in handy to know your multiplication facts, right? To be able to know that 2 and 10 share those factors. You need to use your multiplication tables in your planners. Use it. What would be another equivalent fraction to 2/10? What would be another equivalent fraction? Remember, I didn't say you had to simplify. Equivalent fractions, you can go bigger too. Will. Brielle. So we know that 1/5 worked. Brielle is thinking 4/20. How did you get that, Brielle? Multiply by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 10 times 2 is 20. So 2/10 is equivalent to 4/20. Could I make 4/20 go down to 1/5?
Yes.
Yeah, I could divide a 4 out. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5. These are all equivalent fractions. They can both 2/10 and 4/20 can simplify down to 1/5. So to make that equivalent fraction, you can either go smaller, simplify it, or you can multiply and get bigger. You can always multiply by a 2. The easiest number to multiply to find an equivalent fraction. Simplifying, you have to divide out the same factor out of the numerator and denominator. To find the equivalent fractions, you can multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. Look at example 2, writing equivalent fractions. To find an equivalent fraction, multiply or divide the numerator and denominator by the same number. Write 2 fractions that are equivalent to 6/8. So on your paper, I want you to write 2 fractions equivalent to 6/8. So see if you can come up with an example. And I'm going to be calling on people. So write your 2 examples. Remember, you can multiply up or divide down. But come up with 2 examples of equivalent fractions. Will, what did you tell me one fraction you got? 3/4. You divided both the numerator and denominator by a 2. What's another equivalent fraction? Nick?
You do 3/4. No, sorry. 12/16.
Yep.
12/16. If you multiplied 6/8 by 2, 6 times 2 is 12. 8 times 2 is 16. Anybody come up with a different one? Anthony?
600 and 800.
If we multiplied both the numerator and denominator by 100, it's equivalent. That works. Will? 24 30 seconds if we multiplied them both by 4. Let's look at our next one. 3/10. Let's do this one in a different color. What are equivalent fractions to 3/10? Nolan, do you have one?
One that's equivalent to 3/10.
Yep.
300 and 1,000. Wait, no, wait. Yeah, 300 and 1,000.
If I multiply 3 by 100, I get 300. If I multiply 10 by 100, I get 1,000. What would be another one, Zoe?
6.
If I multiply by 2, 3 times 2 is 6. 10 times 2 is 20. Scarlett, can you think of one? You had the same one as Nolan. Penelope,
9/30.
if we multiply them by 3, 3 times 3 is 9, 10 times 3 is 30. Landon, what's one that you came up with?
I only came up with 2.
Okay, tell me one about.
They're same as those.
Which ones? I've got 3 up there.
300, 300, 1,000, and 620.
Okay, 300, 1,000, and 6/20. Those are good equivalent fractions. Is there a limit to our equivalent fractions?
I don't know.
You can keep multiplying by bigger and bigger and bigger numbers. Okay, you can multiply by 1,000. You can multiply by 1,000,000.
Oh,
Okay.
separate.
Yeah.
Oh.
Do we need to get complicated with bigger numbers and making sure we have enough zeros? No. So when we're doing those equivalent fractions, we want to have a little bit of fun, but the bigger number you get, the easier it is to make a mistake. The easier it is to not add enough zeros. Oh, I see, you did by 10 and you did by 100. So be careful when we get to the test. Remember, we're taking the test next Monday. Be careful that you're not making it too complicated for yourself, because that's when easy, simple mistakes happen. Okay, I want to see you passing your objectives the first time around. Do the easier multiplication. Multiply by 2, multiply by 3. Okay, again, when you get too complicated, that's when simple mistakes happen. Well, 12/40 if we multiplied them both by 4. 3 times 4 is 12, 10 times 4 is 40.
How many questions will we have to test?
Well, we have 4 objectives.
There's like 1 question.
It's usually either 4 or 8 questions per objective. We'll find out as we get closer, but it's going to be the 4 objectives. Let's look down to example 3, simplifying fractions. To simplify a fraction, you divide its numerator and denominator by their greatest common factor. If you don't find the greatest common factor to start, you're going to have to keep dividing down. Sometimes if we divide out a 2 and the greatest common factor was a 4, we have to divide it down again. So if you don't find that greatest common factor right away, it's okay, but you have to make sure that your 2 numbers are relatively prime, that you can't divide anything else out. So if we look at 12/16, what can I divide out? What factor do they share? Josie? 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 16 divided by 4 is 4. Can I get any smaller? No. So Josie found the greatest common factor of 12 and 16. 4 is that biggest factor. If I had divided it just by 2, let's see what would have happened. If I had divided by 2, 12 divided by 2 is 6. 16 divided by 2 is 8. 6 and 8. It's not as small as I can go. So I have to look at that and say, oof, I can get even smaller. I can divide another 2 up. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So on the test, if you give me 6/8 as an answer, is it simplified?
No.
You have to go as small as you can go. You have to simplify it all the way down. It's easier if you find that greatest common factor. That's why we worked on greatest common factor. So it's easier when you find the greatest common factor. But if you don't, just keep dividing down. It's not going to be wrong if you have to divide by numbers 3 times over. It's not wrong as long as you get the final answer correct. So look at 15/35. What can we divide out to get down to our simplified fraction? Will?
5.
We can divide by 5. They both end in a 5, so I know 5 is a factor of both. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 35 divided by 5 is 7. Can I go any smaller? Nope. 3 and 7 are both primes. So I know they don't share anything smaller. Now we have 7 28ths. What can I divide out of 7 and 28? 7 is a prime number. Whew, it only shares a 1 and a 7. So what can I divide out? I can divide that 7 out because 28 is a multiple of 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 28 divided by 7 is 4. So the biggest thing to remember when we are simplifying is to make sure you go as simple as you can. You go as low as you can. If you didn't find that greatest common factor the first time around, keep dividing. All right, example 4. At a basketball game, the home team made 14 out of 22 free throw attempts. The visiting team made 10 out of 25 free throw attempts. Write fractions for the number of free throws made by each of them. Are the fractions equivalent? So, the home team, we know, made 14 out of 22 free throw attempts. How would I write that as a fraction? They made 14 out of 22. Tristan?
14 over 22.
Remember, the numerator is how many you have. The denominator is the possible number. So there was 22 possible. They made 14, so it's 14 over 22. The visiting team made 10 out of 25. How would I write that as a fraction, Nolan?
By
10 out of 25. How do I make that into a fraction?
Write it out.
How? Tell me what to write. What do I put as my numerator?
25. Like 10.
They made 10 of the baskets. So that's our numerator. The numerator is how many they actually have. What was the possible amount they could have made?
25.
So that's our denominator, how many they could have had. So now I need to compare them because it's asking, are the fractions equivalent? How do I find that out? How do I find out if the fractions are equivalent, Zoe?
Like, see what the equivalent fractions are to 10 and 14.
What's the easiest way to see if they're equivalent?
Dividing by 10.
Not by each other. We're not dividing them into each other. That's not going to be able to compare them. Simplify them to the simplest fraction you can get. Are they the same? If they're the same, are they equivalent?
Yes.
Yes. If they're not the same, are they equivalent?
No.
No. So let's look at 14, 22. What can I divide out of 14 and 22? Nolan?
2.
Yeah. They're both even numbers. That 4 and the 2 are even, so I know I can divide a 2 out. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 22 divided by 2 is 11. That's as simple as I go. 7 and 11 are both prime numbers. I can't go any simpler. So let's look at 10 25ths. What can I divide out of 10 and 25? Josie, I can divide a 5 out. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 25 divided by 5 is 5. I can't get any simpler than that. So are they equivalent?
No.
No, because I can't simplify them down to the same number. So the answer to are they equivalent is no. This was a 2-step problem. You had to give me the fractions, and then you had to answer the question. Whenever you are looking at word problems, make sure you are answering the whole question. Make sure you're doing all the parts to it. So be careful with that. That is all we have for Objective 19. So I'm going to say goodbye to my friends at home. Our homework assignment is working on 4.3 in our workbook. So we need to get both of those pages done. And I will see our friends at home later.